Hello, everybody. This is Jack Frew, your host, and thanks for attending the webinar here. Today's webinar is SharePoint Hybrid, to go to the cloud or to stay on the ground. And today's webinar is brought to you by SharePointVideos.com in partnership with FPWeb.net and SP TechCon. So we want to say thanks to FPWeb and to SP TechCon for partnering with us. It's always appreciated. Both offer great services, and SP TechCon puts on a nice show, so I want to definitely give everybody a plug there. Today's panelists, if we maybe want to introduce everybody out, Mark, why don't you go ahead and just give yourself a 30-second introduction. Tell people who you are.
Sure. My name is Mark Kashman. I'm a senior product manager on the SharePoint team, and I've been on the team for a little over 4 years, and before that had built a solution on top of SharePoint for media and entertainment space. But today I mostly focus on SharePoint Online and just what we announced yesterday, the Office 365 video solution, which is really the start of our next-gen portal. So I'll be focused on that for quite some time.
Awesome. Fabian, are you on the line? Can you hear us?
Yes, I am. I have to unmute myself. My name is Fabian Williams. I am a SharePoint architect for Planet Technologies, which is an NSI in the DC metro area. I'm also a SharePoint MVP. And I'm formerly a developer, but I do a lot with hybrid as well because I believe it expands both the IT pro and the dev world. And I'm really excited about Mark Kashman's 365 videos and next-gen portals also.
Yeah, that received. I think that received quite a bit of buzz yesterday. I think a lot of people may be underestimating the demand for that kind of stuff. Let's go to Rob. Rob, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. This is Rob LaMear. I'm the founder and CEO at FPWeb, and we are a managed SharePoint hosting provider, and been working with SharePoint way back in the day since it was built in the front page in around 2000. So it's been an interesting ride watching it evolve, and looking forward to speaking with everyone today.
Awesome, Rob. Glad to have you on the panel. I think you're going to offer some great perspective, especially given your background there. And you see in the bottom right-hand corner, I'm Jack Frew. I run a blog called SharePointJack.com and tweet at SharePointJack. And basically, I mostly do admin stuff, so you see a lot of PowerShell and that kind of stuff on there. And my company is also going through this kind of decision of, do we move to the cloud, and if so, how much? This is a great conversation I think for everybody today. A little bit of housekeeping here. At the end of the webinar, we're going to give away a 1-year subscription to SharePointVideos.com. That's almost a $200 value. We're going to choose the winner from the Q&A board. So if you go on your webinar console that you have as an attendee, you'll see that you can ask us questions. And if you put questions in there, we will do the best that we can to get those routed over to the panelists and try to answer as many as we can. And anybody who asks a question, it doesn't have to be one that we say on air, is eligible to win, and we'll pick one at the end of the webinar and announce it right during the webinar. If you haven't already seen SharePointVideos.com, here's a glimpse of the website. SharePoint Videos is a great source of learning especially for end user stuff, right? There's a lot of training companies that focus on development or focus on how do you build a server. This has got some of that, but I've always felt it's a wonderful end user resource for yourself and for your end users, and they've got a great site. They've also got a nice offering, this visual SP, which integrates in with your SharePoint environment, so that's another option too, right? If you have people that you think would benefit from it on a company-wide scale, it's a really nice integrated offering. So definitely wanted to give SharePoint Videos a plug because they're providing the webinar today, and we really appreciate that. All right, so I think the next thing we go to are our questions, right? So to start this out, there's lots and lots of talk about going to the cloud. Is now the right time? I mean, what's the general opinion? And anyone can speak up here.
Yeah, I'll at least go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
All right, and that was Rob, right? Or was that Mark?
Yeah, this is Mark Kashman.
Okay, Mark.
And, certainly, I know that there is a lot of energy being poured into the cloud in lots of different clouds. The one that we're running in Office 365, obviously the ones that we're running in more of a hosted model with partners and in our own data center, and then certainly on premises, the concept of your own cloud, within your own firewall. And I know that a lot of the work that we're doing to enable hybrid configurations, a lot of that we're doing to enable the if and when you're ready for the cloud, and taking lots of feedback of when it's ready. for certain scenarios or certain workloads or even just certain customers, whether they're concerned about the cloud reservations and whatnot. From a Microsoft perspective, we're pouring a lot of time and energy into making sure that it's not a feature choice, so that if you're looking to do something that you've done on-prem and you would like to do it in the cloud or move it to a hosted model, that you'd be able to do that, but understanding certainly the challenges around migration, challenges around the level of customization and configuration that you have access to. And in general sense, there's no better time to start at least thinking and testing the cloud. And again, not just the Office 365 offering, but offloading things from on-premises for a good reason, hopefully budget reasons, feature and choice reasons, and whatnot. I know that lots of the conversation will be around a number of things that you're asking, or I'm just sort of starting to answer. But I think as far as is it the right time to move to the cloud, or where do you see that in terms of a SharePoint? Is it ready? I've been working with the SharePoint Online offering, and I can tell you the feature gap was really extreme, 3 to 4 years ago. And now looking at it, if you just look at it from a feature perspective, the gaps have significantly closed. And certainly there are some areas that aren't one-to-one. There's one-to-new. So sometimes an old feature replaced with a new or done in a different way. But I still think we've got some pretty distinct scenarios, and I'd love to kind of pitch that question to the other panelists and maybe to audience. Where are we still seeing that you can't really move to the cloud? Again, not just SharePoint Online, but any cloud.
Sure.
What are the areas?
Let me interject here now. Mark works for Microsoft, so we're kind of hearing from the horse's mouth. Fabian, you're on the outside a little bit. I mean, you're an MVP, but you're not an employee of Microsoft, so you maybe would have a little bit more neutral or different position. What's your take on it? I mean, do you think it's the right time for going to the cloud?
Sure, absolutely, and for a couple different points as well. I think personally, as a consultant working in the field, that I still work for a company, but I'm usually client-facing, and I'm very rarely into the office. The fact that we, as a company, have also adopted that model allows me, with a federated identity, to be able to have the same experiences if I'm in the office, consuming the same resources, coming in from the outside in. So I think from a workforce productivity standpoint, this is the perfect time to have a model like this in front of you, so that you can move away from the standard VPN topology, having to worry about all of these either certificates or VPN software and identity management, to have a model that scales both the on-premises and the cloud space, and giving you the same information with relative ease. I think that also, as I speak to my customers, and I always tell them, because I see both large and small, but usually I see enterprise customers that are very slow to move, slow to adopt new technologies, wholesale, because they've invested so much, effort in their internal infrastructure and their internal staff. I say that, you can start to pick low-hanging fruits that will make you more agile, a bit more responsive, and as you start to look at things like Dell and OneDrive for Business, start to allow your end users to consume information at their pace, by using these technologies.
Awesome, thanks, Fabian. And if it's possible, I don't know if you can talk to me louder. You're just a little bit faint on your mobile phone there. We've got a question from the audience. This is from Donald, and he says, my first question concerns SharePoint Online latency, which I think is a great question. He says, all of my testing in the SPOL environment has been very slow compared to my on-premise environment. Now, this might actually be a good question, for both Mark and for Rob, because you both are involved in hosting SharePoint and might have some different perspectives there. So, Rob, we haven't heard from you. Let's hear what you have to say.
Yeah, latency, basically comes from that data being far away from the user, right? And it also depends on the internet connection of the actual user. So, those are the two variables that you have to deal with, and there's definitely no exception for having that data living closer to, the user, which is why, excuse me, most providers have, global data centers. Obviously, Microsoft has them all over the place, and FP Web is global as well. So, that's the big one. The one we can't really control and do too much about is the internet connection for the user. And something that we often see is, you've got to consider how saturated that pipe is. A lot of people will say, hey, we've got a 100 meg link or a 1 gig link. Well, what's the saturation level? That's one of the questions. Mark, what else do you have on that one?
Yeah, there's kind of the 2 points. I mean, that connection or distance between where somebody is and where they're routing through to get to the final endpoint is something that is always a challenge. And I agree with Rob. It's just one of those things that hopefully as the protocols of the internet get better, we will benefit from that. On the end of what we're doing that I can certainly hope promote here is every time we're looking at building a new service, anytime we're looking at optimizing pages, the amount of information on a page, obviously some of that is based on just best practices for when you build out your own pages. We're starting to have sessions as one indicator that just talks about how to optimize performance when you use SharePoint Online. So there's a lot that you can do just from a page performance, how many web parts, if they're making too many calls back to the service. Obviously, we don't ever want to limit the types of solutions people build, both custom or just configuration on the page. But there are best practices, and the benefit of us now in SharePoint Online, which hopefully is the ultimate pass back to the benefit of everybody else, is we feel the pain that SharePoint may or may not be giving you in terms of the latency, how long it takes us to upload, obviously migration, a lot of scenarios where it just feels like there may be some slowness. We are addressing, monitoring, and doing everything that we can, both on the hardware side. So we've just finished a recent round of hardware refresh. And one of the issues that we saw, just to be transparent, is we were seeing some significant latency in one of our farms in EMEA. And it is something that we've put out a statement on, and certainly we've taken the actions in terms of mitigating. So things are now in a much better and really much more future-proof state. Some of it was based on we just needed to get a better footprint in place on better hardware, because we opened up a channel to our education world in EMEA that at that time just brought in a lot of new people onto that farm who were very active on the farm. And the way that we had projected out modeling for X number of tenants, X number of usage during times of day, and we monitor that all the time. There have been some hits that we've accrued and certainly have now adjusted for, where by nature of how many people are using the system, which is a good problem to have, that more people are using it and more people are coming back more often. Unfortunately, we hit sort of the reality of, we didn't catch it before it got into a bad state. But
Sure.
That learning that we had in EMEA, we pushed all around the world and are now seeing, at least just from an access and a success of hitting pages, and hopefully them not taking too long to load, we've improved that. But it's something we pay attention to a lot, and we really now, with every new feature, really pay attention to that.
Thanks. Hey, I've got a question here from Geraldo, and that question is, he's got a concern with security on SharePoint Online and Office 365, and is wondering if you can maybe explain what the risks are. And are there different tiers? Like, I think I've actually heard that there's a special Office 365 for government customers. Like, can you comment on that real quickly?
Sure. So the first thing, if you can bring up on the background, if you just type in trust.office365.com, and once you land there, you'll find security. Click. It shouldn't be too hard to find. But we have a pretty broad security message that we push out for all of Office 365, and there's a lot of documentation and videos to review here. And a lot of it is all about the data center, getting in physically, virtually, obviously all of the layers of security that we have in place. And the statement, is we focus almost half of our R&D from every workload on the levels of security. SharePoint brings its own level in terms of just how the product's been built over the last 14 years, but really how it's hardened in our data centers and the layers that we put in front of it, and certainly the monitoring that's sort of on that back end should anything happen. There's a lot of great sessions after I'll drop in a couple links where we really talk about our security at a SharePoint level. We just had a good one at the Tech Ed Europe. We really expose the level of activity that we put through both on hardening the code and our ops teams, along with our engineering team, sort of playing red hat, blue hat, who can get in now, but nature of playing lots of scenarios through. So the level of security that we have in SharePoint Online is, I think, higher than most customers would have put in their own data centers, if not the highest. That is our goal. That's our target. And our promise is pretty clear here. Again, when you look at this website, it is effectively articulating our overall security, privacy, and our SLA for all of Office 365. But any SharePoint Online feature, page, experience falls under this promise. And I know that the teams focus a lot on ensuring when a feature goes out the door, when we have an issue, and hopefully before we have an issue, that security is top of mind.
Thanks. That ties into another question that I think Brian asked, which is there a single resource to find information about security and compliance, such as HIPAA, safe harbor, ensuring data never leaves U.S. borders, etc.? And I thought maybe we would direct this one partially to Microsoft, but also I want to get Rob some airtime because one of the things that FP Web offers is this idea of a private cloud, right? So, Rob, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and what do we want to talk? Do you want to go back to around security?
Well, if we go back to the question, the question was, is there a single resource to find information about security and compliance, such as HIPAA, safe harbor, ensuring data never leaves U.S. borders, etc.? And it might have been directed more at Microsoft, but I think that the thing that comes to mind when I think about people who are worried about their data is that private cloud might be an option for them, right? That that there's on-premise, there's Office 365, which is completely managed, right? And then that area in the middle is kind of private cloud, which is one of the things I think FP Web is very well known for. So maybe talk about that and how you guys handle things like HIPAA and Safe Harbor and making sure data stays where it's supposed to stay.
Yeah, and I think just to back out, zoom out a little bit, there are different places for these workloads to live, and probably all the panelists would agree that all the SharePoint workloads do not belong in one place or one cloud, so there will probably be a blend, and obviously that's where we're going with this hybrid conversation today. If we get back into security and compliance, HIPAA, for instance, most of the larger providers are now willing to be on the hook as a business associate, with the client. And that's one of the benefits, that someone like an FP Web can offer with the private cloud. We actually come in on the audits where folks can actually go into our data centers and verify what rack and server their stuff is living on. We sign off and say it will never move, from this data center if they're in the UK or somewhere here in the St. Louis area. Speaking to Safe Harbor, there is a lot of pushback from the EU, the European community, and even Canada and Germany on where this data has to reside. They don't want it to be in the States, and that's okay. And that's why folks like Microsoft and FP Web have data centers located in Europe close to these customers so that we can speak to them there. Then you've got all your regular compliance, you've got PCI and SOX and things like that. And the last thing I would say, the power of a private cloud and a provider like FP Web is the flexibility to work around those contracts with the particular customer's needs. That's enough of my plug. I think there's it really comes back to where does your workload best fit, and that's really a good talking point for everyone today.
Okay. Here's one. I don't know who to direct this to, but we have a couple questions in sequence here. One's from Carol, one's from Samantha. Carol asks if we could maybe expand on the difference between SharePoint Online, Office 365, and on-premise and hybrid. And Samantha's got a pretty similar question. If you already have SharePoint in the enterprise, like on-premise, what's the benefit of going online? Is there any benefit at all, right? So who wants to speak on this? And let's keep it to, let's say, 60 seconds or less, so we can get everybody involved here.
Sure. Can you hear me? This is Fabian.
Hey, Fabian. Not only can I hear you, but you sound great now.
I know. Now I'm in front of my my computer, so I can talk. And it's okay. So, all right, 60 seconds.
So Christina should be happy because she asked us to let you know that we couldn't hear you.
All righty. So the first thing, I guess we should prime the conversation by saying that you can have, when it comes to hybrid in today's language, you have inbound hybrid, outbound hybrid, bidirectional hybrid in terms of supporting things like search, business connectivity services, Duet, right now, and then you can also have the same hybrid conversation around OneDrive for Business, Yammer, and so on and so forth. In terms of what it does for you in a 60-second pitch is that what you're doing is that you're allowing federated users, so this goes back to the identity question, and by that I mean a person who is federated between the cloud and your on-premises system through ADFS and possibly DERSing, to have a single identity that they can log in and gain access to resources on both sides of the fence. In the case of data, what you can do is expose OData endpoints in your on-premises environment, surface that up through DCS, and have a person log in through SharePoint Online and consume that data. In terms of search, you can have curated search results that's looking at content that's both residing in the on-premises side as well as your cloud side, and having that served up in one view. There's better stories coming along down the pipe in terms of how that's going to be consumed in terms of visibility and ranking. But for right now, you get basically a result set that will distinguish between online and in the cloud. So that's my 60-second. We can go deeper, but that's just a good primer.
Rob, let's get your 60-second answer.
Yeah, I'm going to try and cut it down to 30. And I think that from the CXO level, it remains about getting ROI about existing investments. So, those folks aren't going to move any of that stuff until they have a need, a pain being a refresh on the software or hardware side. On the other side of it, you've got customization, you've got security, you've got compliance issues that need to be investigated, with someone like Fabian, before they can consider that move.
That was awesome. That was 30 seconds. Perfect. Mark, can you beat that? Can you give us information in less than 30 seconds?
Yeah, I will try. I think there's the reality of, SharePoint Online is by no means you move everything there, and that's the expectation. I think there are a lot of new scenarios, whether we are creating new ones as we go forward and innovating, or there are just some scenarios and workloads that people haven't yet built on premises, but they have in their project pipeline. And, if you have any sense of moving to the cloud or wanting to move to the cloud, I think there's just two ways of testing the cloud and seeing if it is, something that is going to be viable. I think it does give you greater reach and accessibility in terms of SharePoint Online has deep, rich security, but is internet-facing by default. So access for people that are multinational, geo-distributed. There are some boundaries there. There's obviously the benefits of less management, less of a footprint. Hopefully, from a budgeting perspective, I agree with Rob. This is not something where people look at, oh, I've invested in SharePoint for the next 3 years. I'm just going to move to the cloud and add more to my investment and kind of have a double pocket dig. But I think there's realities of if you haven't yet started a particular workload but you have the need, the cloud is a great place to look, both in a hosted model and something like Office 365. And there's lots of new workloads like what we announced yesterday. If there is something like moving your OneDrive for Business or the Portal for Video solution or something that is just a new workload, having that and moving into a hybrid state is very viable and something that I think both private and public clouds invest in. So that's my 90 seconds.
Can we jump back at something else? The question around security, I just want to put my 2 cents in on that. I've been working with Bill Bear, and there's a tool that he's working on that he's allowed me to test right now. In fact, he publicly said that he was looking for testers. I'm just one of the testees. That actually comes in 3 phases. This is the phase 1 of it, and the phase 1 of it asks you questions about your environment and your on-premises environment and your either proposed or your current SharePoint Online environment. And as you answer these questions, it tells you from a risk standpoint whether you're low, mid, or high, and provides you mitigation techniques as to how to get to that state where you could be doing hybrid. And it does have links in there that ties back to NIST cloud computing standards, as well as a Microsoft link in terms of Office 365 Trust Center and so on and so forth, which I copied inside this, so we can certainly pass it on a little bit later. And one of the things I didn't mention is that hybrid doesn't mean that you're migrating from on-premises to online eventually. You could actually be in a persistent hybrid state where you want to maintain a presence in your on-premises environment because of regulatory or contractual reasons, and still have ingress inside the cloud.
I've got, just looking at the questions on here, there seems to be multiple ones, like a lot of people are asking, and I think we've already kind of touched on this a little bit, but I wonder if we could maybe get some maybe more defined answers as they relate to Microsoft versus private cloud versus any other choice. Office 365. A lot of people are asking about this. Like I'm in Canada, for example, and I need to keep my data in Canada, right? Or I'm in Europe and I need to keep it in Europe and what have you. So, Rob, just from your knowledge of working with this stuff, it sounds like you guys have data centers everywhere, and that if somebody were to host with you guys with a private cloud, that you can basically just, the customer can tell you where that needs to go, and you'll put it there and you'll keep there. Is that a correct statement?
Yeah, other than we're everywhere. We're definitely not everywhere.
Okay.
So we do pick our markets on where the demand is.
Okay.
But I did mention those three markets seem to be very specific. Canada, the EU, particularly the UK, and Germany. Those folks, they have specific requirements around their privacy that they need their data to live closer to them. And we have to respect that, and that's where we can flex a little bit around contracts, and those auditors can actually walk in there and make sure that their data is residing where we say it is, and that's important as an ex-auditor. I always wanted to be able to verify where that stuff was living.
How about you, Mark? I mean, it probably is a little bit trickier in Office 365. I know with Azure, when you set up something, you can kind of specify what data center it goes in. When somebody signs up for Office 365, do they have the option of telling you where they want that put? And if they do get it put somewhere, is it going to stay there?
Yeah, there is a way for them in terms of putting it into a very specific data center within the same region. The common model, the way that we work, is we have a primary and a secondary, both within the same region. So if you think about East Coast, West Coast for the United States, but in Europe certainly it spans across different countries. And in APAC and all the different regions where we are, there's sort of that concept of primary, secondary. In that case, we can't tell you which is your primary or secondary, but for some customers and countries, it is not an issue. Certainly we fall in line with what Rob said around the countries that do require for it to be in country. And the biggest one where we've made the most significant progress, both for our own business needs and certainly to then go into a new market, is in China, where we have a very, very different model, working with a partner that's called 21 Bayonet, who is effectively hosting all of Office 365 on our behalf, obviously with us very, very involved from an engineering and support perspective. But it is given us a way to then operate in China with what China requires. And that was a big monumental, multi-year prep and execution, and still ongoing. For markets like Germany, UK, and others that fall under the EU model clause, some it's just a matter of addressing the concerns of what their data regulations are, and some of them are not always just in country, but it's more that concern of where and how my data is managed. But for those countries that do require, I can't announce anything, but I can tell you that we do have a team that is always asking, where do we need to put our next data center? How big does it need to be? Does it need to be in a specific country? And a lot of those questions, have a common outcome like you see within China. So I know that we focus on that. I know that the business that we feel like we can't address, we would like to, but to be perfectly honest, that where we have a good partner, whether they are thinking in terms of partnership or just good for their business, we are just as happy that people are able to get SharePoint where they want to or where they can. So we certainly support and have always supported that hosting model. We're just trying to stretch the bounds, though, that what markets we're in. We're not just in market from a sales motion. We're actually in market to the requirements of how the broader sense of the customer in that country or in other countries, what their data requirements are.
Mark, I have a quick question, and Rob and Fabian chime in on this as well. But if you're a global company, for example, and you've got people all over the globe, what are people doing in terms of configuring their, if they do move to the cloud? Do people end up with multiple tenants in different regions so that each region's got fast response time, or are they able to do it from one location? You run into some some properties of physics, right? There's always going to be some latency if we're going from one side of the globe to the other, which is something I don't think we're ever going to solve in our lifetime.
Yeah,
Rob, you want to go first?
Yeah, go for it.
No, do you want to go first, Rob?
No, go ahead, guys.
Fabian, I think your
I'll
microphone sounds so good. You should go.
I should go first. So actually, I just left a meeting today talking about the very same topic, and you're going to get the consultant answer. It's going to be it depends. It depends on what you're trying to do with your particular situation, with your scenario. And you could certainly geolocate items close to where you have these audiences. That's the situation that I'm involved in right now. And but I don't see an issue. Like you said, there's some physics that you can't get around, and certainly the last mile piece of it is going to be something that maybe somewhat beyond your control. It's going to be down to the ISP and to you. I know I actually went and did a few SharePoint Saturdays in South Africa a few months ago, and internet connection there is just horrible. Trying to get, and I was trying to do a SharePoint online session, and it was somewhat brutal. But those are things that you just can't get around because part of the requirements to have a data center in South Africa is for them to have redundant power supply, and they don't in South Africa. So,
oh, wow.
Some of the things that you can't get around is not only physics but also infrastructure. And if you don't have the infrastructure, I know South Africa, I think they connect through somewhere in Ireland or somewhere like that. That is
wow.
Their drop is, so you have to contend with that physics.
Yeah. Rob, it sounded like you were starting to say something. We don't want to cut you off, so go ahead and chime in with your 2 cents as well.
Yeah, and we've done all of it, and I can say that distributed seems to be a better model for those folks that are multinational. You can't get across the latency of around 100 milliseconds, going across the big oceans between the continents. The good thing is Australia finally now has some decent connectivity out of Australia, so they are now able to get some things done, whereas you could really only do business with them via Singapore. It was about the closest we could get to them. So yeah, for us, it makes sense to get that data closer to those folks where they've got large pockets of users, and then federate between the two and sync them up, on a basis that makes sense for them.
Sure. I got some feedback from Christina in the chat room, so we don't try and get a couple of her questions answered as well. This one might be more for Mark. One specific question is, do extranet users require Office 365 licenses as well? Mark, can you answer that one real quick?
Yeah, that's an easy one. If you're an Office 365 user and you have a site that you've turned on external sharing, currently our stance is you can invite up to an unlimited amount of external users, and they can come into the site. They can be a part of the site. You can invite them just to a document. So we've increased that over time. It used to be a limit of 10,000 per tenant. We've just up-leveled that so that it's just an unlimited amount of external sharing, and we really mean that. The concept, though, is they do need to be somebody who's not a part of your common AD infrastructure, so they're not an employee. And the other thing is, if they were a vendor that is on full-time, that also would be considered not an external user. But
so what you're saying is we can't sign up for a single user Office 365 subscription and then sign up 10,000 of our friends.
Well, if they're truly your friends and you're working with them and they don't report under your same company domain, that is an external user. And certainly there's a lot of scenarios where you're kind of working the system, but the intent is if they're a full-time employee or a full-time vendor, whether they're actually on your Active Directory or not, but the context of that they are actually an employee, for lack of a better description. We have a full description of what is an external user, and I can drop that in. But it is definitely supported at the site level. You can share also externally at a document level. And I think maybe one area where Rob was just talking, which I think is very interesting, is that federating between two, not companies, but tenants. And if the company invests in multiple tenants, how would they then be able to work across the wire? And with external sharing, you can invite anybody in the world, whether they're an Office 365 customer or not. So the extreme would be a Rob at yahoo.com or a Fabian at gmail.com. It's just an invitation which they would accept, and that routes them through.
Right. Reminds me a little bit of the early days of PayPal, right? You just send an email. It doesn't matter if they're on board or not, they will be, right? So it might be a good segue. Rob asked a question, and a couple other people have asked this too. The topic is around hybrid scenarios, right? And I was wondering if maybe we could start with Fabian on this one, but I think you might all have some stuff. Talk to us about hybrid and what kind of scenarios are you seeing out there that people are using? What's working? What's not working? Maybe even start off with a quick definition of hybrid for those listening that don't really understand what it really means.
Sure. I don't have a dictionary definition, but just to explain it in common vernacular, a hybrid environment is one as such where you have resources either on premises or online that you're trying to share between your users who could be spending also on-prem online, so you necessarily federate them so that they have a single identity. Some of those resources, as it is in today's speak, is Search, VCS, SAP through Duet. But if you extend that conversation out, you also have OneDrive for Business and Yammer, as well as services that you can allow your on-premises environment to scale and work with in the cloud in a seamless environment. Take that even further, the way I like to look at this is that hybrid is not even just regulated to that. You can actually have hybrid apps. So you could be writing apps that provide a hosted application that they're consuming information both from on-premises and online. So hybrid could mean a lot of things to a lot of people. It just depends on the context that you're speaking in. In terms of what I see from a practical standpoint, when I speak to customers and I encourage them to be looking into hybrid, I usually look at their workforce to see if it's a distributed workforce or not, and ask them how are they handling access to information, how are they handling security and identity management, and advise them to the fact that Azure is out there, making things easy for them, by either offering Windows Azure Active Directory or using ADFS with Dursing to have that federated approach so that you have a single identity of your users, and having that hybrid experience that people can be more productive from wherever they are.
Thanks, Fabian. Rob or Mark, do you want to chime in on things that you're seeing that are working when it comes to hybrid? What is is there kind of a particular place that people usually start with? Do they throw one service in the cloud and leave other things on premise and then move things later, or what's the usual, if there is a usual, what does that normally look like for an organization?
Yeah, I can talk to kind of maybe two ways to answer, and I'll try to keep each pretty short. One is, what has Microsoft done? We certainly, by nature of having our cloud to move into, we want to move there and sort of be first and best in terms of adoption. So take that with a grain of salt. We are going in that direction. It is the right direction for Microsoft to go in. And we're also, just like any other enterprise, we have significant investments in SharePoint on-premises. And so there is a pattern to how we've been moving to the cloud. And the way that we did it is we first started with everybody's My Documents and moved those into everybody now has OneDrive for Business. And that was, a plan, an execution, and then some training and a awareness campaign to let people know that, you're now here, we're going to move you there, those types of things. There was also a big move for all collaboration sites, so anything that was sort of not a customized team site, project site, a workspace, those all got moved. They were on sort of a distinct farm, and they moved to SharePoint Online into our tenant. And again, that took time, and there was an analysis of which sites aren't being used, which ones need to move over. Do we have to move everything, or just a handful, or if not, some percentage of.
So, Mark, let me ask you a question here. So you mentioned that you guys kind of started off with essentially My Sites, right? And you moved those to the cloud while you had other servers on premise. Now, there isn't currently, I don't think, there's no way for one SharePoint farm to consume the My Site of, let's say, a SharePoint Online farm, right? That's all done through syncing properties in AD. So what kind of challenges did you see there?
Yeah, the big challenge was, everything, and I don't think this is just a Microsoft product technology limit or one of those that you just kind of need to be aware of, but I think Fabian would tell you, if you come into this as a start and you don't have a healthy Active Directory environment, then lots of things are going to kind of fall down, no matter where you point authentication to come from or to. So there was a big effort, obviously, to look at how many objects we had in there and limit them down and just put it into fewer forests. And I'm not an expert in that area, but I think that is a common first step. So Microsoft did that. There was also just the understanding that what we were building into the product, which we shipped in the SharePoint SP1 for 2013, was that the code that made it aware so that if you had some people that you were going to keep on premises, or you knew that you were moving some people to online for that workload, OneDrive for Business, that you would route them appropriately. And a lot of that was based on, we know the authentication of who this person is, where we're supposed to route them to, and to keep that intact so the experience is right. We saw a lot of customers doing that on their own as well. So we worked with one at the SharePoint conference, which is Black & Decker, and they had already done SP1 before we shipped SP1. And we were a little concerned they were going to get a little, upset with us that we basically rewrote or wrote everything that they spent time building. But what they appreciated was we actually provided them the finish so that the experience was smooth, which is a lot of that auth back and forth. So we, for a while, had a split deployment of that single workload. So there were a lot of people that remained My Documents, a lot of people that were OneDrive for Business, and some of that was just a point in time. You can't do everybody in a weekend kind of thing. And some of it was by choice of who to go first, which regions, and then to just continue to execute. So we were in a state, again, pre-SP1, where we were a split deployment. Now with SP1, where we're trying to be a little bit more proactive in promoting that you can not just put yourself into a hybrid state, but successfully move a workload into online for the benefits of online, and I think we can maybe even talk about that more and more. But just from what's the actual project, and I think that's where Fabian probably spends a lot of time of doing the right analysis, putting the right plan in place, putting the realities of how long it takes to do X and Y, and then the end state being what is the desired outcome. You may always have a set of users that are on-prem. Email supports that, so that you can have a set of users that are using Exchange on premises and Exchange online. Similar, true for a lot of workloads for SharePoint Online. And again, if you look at then the next phase that we went into of team and collaboration, there's some collaboration sites that there was pushback from it for business reasons not to put them into the cloud. So they sort of raised their hand and said, not yet.
For those of you in the audience, I was just browsing a page that has a bunch of Visio diagrams. If you haven't already seen this, like I've got one of them up right now, which is this which hybrid topology to use. I put the link to the page in the chat window, so if you haven't already been involved answering questions, whatever, just take a quick look there and ask us some questions, what have you. But there's some pretty nice stuff here, and the neat thing is these are all available not only as finished PDFs, but as Visio, which I personally have used, where I've just gone in and kind of edited some of what Microsoft had and used it as a basis for something that I had to present to to a decision maker on a project, what have you. So a good resource there. One of the questions that came across, this one is from Prasad. It says, if we have a lot of customizations that include apps, pages, web parts, workflows, all in 2010, would Office 365 Azure be the right choice, or a hybrid deployment with on-premise custom servers, or entirely on-premise? What's recommended? And I think that that brings up a good question, which is, there must be some scenarios where the cloud isn't the right choice, and I thought maybe we would talk about that as well.
Right. So if you're heavily customized, or well, we'll start from that because that's where the premise of the question came from. If you're in a heavily customized environment, then and you're looking to span to the cloud, then hybrid may not be for you, but you could certainly accomplish some of that and still use other technologies in terms of SharePoint 2013 by creating provider-hosted application to move over to the app model. The biggest thing that I see from my customers, and I think we already knew that I live in the DC metro area. Most of my customers are federal. Is from the standpoint of regulatory compliance, PII information, sometimes HIPAA, sometimes SOX. In terms of some of these regulations, things need to be FISMA compliant. So these requirements is a detractor for them moving things totally to the cloud. But with working with Azure in terms of and working with your data in terms of what data can be surfaced to the cloud, how do you represent that data so it still tells the story you needed to tell? You can certainly build a data model that will support that, publish that data model, have that data model be consumed in a hybrid environment and still allow access to that data, even though you can't move everybody and everything to the cloud.
Thanks, Fabian. George had a good question, I think. If you decided to go to the cloud and then changed your mind and decided to come back on-premise, how do you get your data out of the cloud? How do you get it, if it's, for example, Office 365, do you need a migration tool? Is that something that Microsoft will help you with? It's a little different, I think, if you do something like an FP Web, private cloud, because generally, Rob, correct me if I'm wrong, but you guys are running, the same kind of SharePoint server that you'd run on-premise. You're just managing it for people, right? So the options might be different there.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Jack. Our stuff, you can literally port it in or out or to another provider as needed.
Right. What I've seen with the fact that Office 365 has a set of APIs which tie into your Exchange, your Link, your SharePoint, your OneDrive for Business, you certainly have access to this information via API tools, and you can certainly write your own applications to move that back and forth. And I'm sure ISVs out there are thinking about this or already have solutions out there that will allow you to move data between on-premises to online and online to on-premises. But certainly the tooling is out there for you to do it yourself if you want, via the APIs.
Thanks. All right, let's take a look and see if we've got some other questions. I have a couple of them. They're kind of related. Brian asked this. I'm going to probably, it looks like Med Husadan asked this as well. Not related to the last question, but something we talked about a few minutes back. The definition of external users as it relates to one being free on Office 365, and then also somebody asked a question, if I have on-premise SharePoint, are external users free there? So Mark, that might be a question for you.
I apologize. I had my head turned for 2 seconds while you were reading.
Oh, Mark, I was just telling everybody how they were going to get a free autographed signature from you, with your picture. So we've got all the addresses here, and we're just going to send them right up now.
Here, I got my Sharpie at the ready.
Sounds good. The question, Mark, was, a couple questions came in about the idea of external users in SharePoint, right? We talked about earlier how Office 365 offers now apparently unlimited external users. Somebody asked for kind of a definition of that, and I think we kind of talked about that a little bit earlier about it being a non-employee, not somebody that's directly under your control, like like a full-time contractor, that they would kind of count as an employee in that sense. But another person asked, and that was a great question, what if you have SharePoint on-premise? What if you've got the standard SharePoint 2013? Are external users free there, or do they still require a license and what have you?
Yeah, so we did change our model both for SharePoint Online and in the initial release of SharePoint 2013. We used to ship a special SKU called SharePoint for Internet Sites, which also had kind of an extranet component to it. And effectively what you were doing was paying Microsoft a bigger chunk of change to not worry about how many client access licenses there were, how many users were using that farm or system. So that was a big change for the internet. Certainly, when we shipped SharePoint 2013, if you built a public-facing website on SharePoint, we were not going to charge you extra. It was just the cost of the same license for SharePoint 2013 as anybody internally. And certainly you could make it externally facing in a very public, anonymously accessible way. And we weren't going to, from an audit perspective, we weren't concerned with how many users were hitting that farm. And that same is true for extranet on premises. The onus is to set up and configure the system. So if you have SharePoint 2013, it's set up as an extranet, and you allow your users to either access it anonymously or not. Certainly, there are benefits from an extranet scenario for people to be able to log in and have either a personalized experience or ability to log and track them. But that same SKU and licensing applies to extranet as it does intranet. If you built it and you enable it for external folks to submit and log on and join in, then that's open and available. But it is a configuration that you put in place and manage. The difference in SharePoint Online is we kind of do all that for you, and it's just a simple invite into a tenant because you enable external sharing per site collection. So a lot of what I've seen different companies and certainly our own consulting resources recommend is if you're in SharePoint Online, and I think the same would be true in a hosted model, or on premises in terms of how you configure. You're creating a zone to do external sharing. In SharePoint Online, it's a part of a tenancy or a site collection. Different, obviously, how you do it on premises. But that key thing is it's not pre-configured in the on-premises deliverable except for licensing. In online, it's sort of ready to use, as you go. Licensing is almost similar, obviously, just articulated in a different way.
Awesome, thanks. I'm looking at the current questions that are out there, and I think we've probably handled all of the questions about licensing. So let me circle back to one of the other topics. One question I think for you, Rob, is when organizations do like a private cloud, how do they connect to that? Is that cloud something that's exposed on the internet, or do you get a dedicated line from the telco, or is there like a VPN connection? Like, what are the options there?
Good question. So,
and Rob, if you could speak up just a little bit because you're coming in kind of faint.
Is that better?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay. So, and this is addressed mostly to small, medium enterprise. So we've got folks who come in over private lines. They want something dedicated very fast, so we can do that over any of the telcos, nationwide and global. A more common scenario is a simple VPN, so that we can sync up with their AD, and that's a one-way trust, so that if something happens on our end, it does not compromise them back at their headquarters. And so here's what really does happen in a private cloud, guys, is by function, and I wanted to paint this picture for you guys, is that typically folks have an intranet on-prem on SharePoint, one of the various flavors. Then they typically have Salesforce Cloud, and they want those two to be able to talk to each other. And they've already got that sorted out. So they've got their CRM now and their intranet. Then what happens is typically they come to us and they ask for an extranet on private cloud because they've got customizations and they've got security requirements. So we've set up their own environment for them, and then we connect to those to Salesforce and their intranet. Then the fourth one that we've seen added for this hybrid environment is a test or DR out to either AWS or Azure. And then coming late is Office 365, but extremely helpful because now you've got your Office web apps covered, you've got Exchange, and you've got Link. So if you think about those 5 clouds, that is a very common hybrid situation that we see, that we're able to use our private cloud to connect to those other ones.
Question for the group here. A lot of people talk about going to the cloud, and they're talking about different reasons for it, right? One reason might be because people think they're going to save money, or one might be that they think it's going to be easier to manage or whatever. I mean, if you guys each, let's hear from all 3 of you. If you had to pick the top 2 reasons in order to move to the cloud, what would they be? Rob, let's hear from you here first.
The top 2? Yeah, I would say the flexibility around that, being able to move pretty quickly and get some flexibility from an actual provider on what your specific needs are, so that if you've got requirements on-prem, you can meet those with the right provider. Then the second one is really around performance. We had someone else earlier asking about performance. This stuff can all be tweaked to meet specific performance requirements. I don't think that's an issue anymore. With the right environment.
Okay. Now, that's interesting because you're coming from one perspective. Mark, what's your take on it? What would your top 2 reasons be for somebody to move to the cloud?
One of the ones that we see pretty common, and it's a kind of an overall promise of Office 365, is mobility. Just having that ability to not have to VPN in. A lot of these new services and even old services are starting to get more of an app or a smaller device type access, and for a lot of the data, whether it's email, documents, or lists and data, is something that is getting more and more consumed from a smaller device. So the cloud, kind of comes with that. It's mobile first, or at least mobile ready, or we're working on it to be more so mobile. The other thing that I see, which would be my second, is just similar to what Rob said. When there are new projects, instead of taking the time to stand up the farm or the new component or configuring it or building it, there are a lot of scenarios where you can just go and get it in the cloud and either spend more time doing that connection to your existing investments as opposed to building it out and then connecting it.
And Fabian, how about you? What are your top 2 reasons you see people moving to the cloud?
Certainly. I think Robin Mark did a great job of stealing whatever I was going to say. But
when that happens.
yeah, but what I would go is mobility and agility. And mobility, for what Mark said before, in terms of just having the ability to get to things quicker without having to rely on other technologies that are prohibitive, especially when you're looking at IT to solve these issues for you. This gives you quicker access, quicker return on investment. And the story I usually tell is from the agility standpoint is if you're a large company that's slow to move and you want to be able to be nimble, then it's easy to go out there and to stand up. I don't know if easy is a relative term, but it's better for you to go out there and stand up a hybrid scenario to even proof of concept something out of the way, tying that into your existing infrastructure, so you're looking at real data and real metrics. And from a small company standpoint, if you want to play in the big leagues rather than investing in all of these infrastructure and staff and all of these items, then you can basically go out there and get a hybrid scenario or a cloud scenario that allows you to grow at your own pace. So those are the reasons why I think cloud is important and
awesome.
relevant.
Thanks. Another question that came from the audience here, and this one was from Jim. What's the best reference for feature comparisons between SharePoint Online and SharePoint On-Premise? So I don't know if any of you guys have favorites that you like in that sense. I just quickly searched it, and I came up with this article here. So Jim, this one is somebody's SharePoint blog, compare SharePoint features online and on-premise, and it's got a link to a what looks like a TechNet article. So we'll go ahead and click there, and let's see, what do they say here? This is, oh, here we go. That's a feature availability across plans. It sounds like, Mark, you might have one?
Well, and I'm just telling you what you're looking at right now is the SharePoint Online service description.
Okay.
It sort of articulates the different features accessible or available, whether it's licensing or technical, in the different plans we offer. There's also one that compares on-premises, but I don't know if it really gets into hybrid and you know, sort of the why and the when. I know that one of our friends, Christian Buckley, often does sessions that kind of are similar in theme to what we're talking about today, but really articulating the business decisions through when to stay on-prem, when to go online, and certainly when to bridge the gap in between, which is sometimes the way he describes it as the journey into one or the other. And it doesn't abstract too much between whether you move to SharePoint Online or something in a hosted model or VM. But he does a nice job of looking at it from a business perspective. And after I stop talking, which is right now, I will go and see if I can find one of his latest.
That'd be awesome. We are almost at the end of our time here. One of the things we definitely wanted to do was pull a winner from the audience here. It looks like the winner that we have today is Christina H. Christina, you will get an email from us. You get a one-year subscription to SharePointVideos.com with over 900 expert video tutorials. I think that's pretty awesome. Again, here's the SharePoint Video site. If you don't know, SharePoint Video is Asif Ramani's creation. He's a SharePoint MVP that I've personally enjoyed hearing speak, multiple times. The guy does a great job, and the website is fantastic. A lot of the videos are his. Some of the videos now are also from other experts in SharePoint, and you can't go wrong there, right? I saw a lot of questions in the chat room, and I just want to personally say I'm sorry if we didn't get to your question. I wanted to throw up a couple of Twitter accounts up here because everybody that's on the forum is on Twitter here, and if you didn't get your question answered, definitely feel free to ping these folks on Twitter and say, hey, look, I still have some questions. I wonder if you can help me out here, right? So there's Fabian on Twitter. He's twitter.com/Fabian Williams. This one over here is Rob's. He's twitter.com/FPWebRob. And Mark Kashman is over here at twitter.com/MKashman. And, of course, their handle is just the @ symbol and, at the beginning of their name, what have you. I'm on there as @SharePointJack if you have questions you think I can help. And we definitely wanted to thank everybody for sticking with us today and for asking your great questions and all that. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. I hope that the cloud and on-prem isn't too cloudy or confusing, but certainly we're open to feedback, and whether it's through me or through direct to Microsoft or anything we can do to make that less cloudy and confusing, please let us know.
Awesome. Fabian or Mark, I'm sorry, we just heard from Mark. Fabian or Rob, any last comments?
This is Fabian. I just want to thank everyone for taking time out of their day today, both the panelists and the attendees, and for Oscar for putting this on, and you yourself, Jack, for moderating. It's been my pleasure to do this, and I enjoy talking about hybrid on-premises, online stuff. Hit me up anytime on Twitter or send me an email as well. I respond to all.
Hey guys,
Awesome.
this is Rob, and I would say, again, thanks to everyone for putting this together, and dip your toe in the water, everyone. It's time to get started in the cloud, so find a workload that makes sense for you.
Thank you, everybody. One more thing before we go. I think another link came through regarding the kind of comparison matrix. Somebody sent over this video from Channel 9, and it looks like this is from Christian Buckley, who's another pretty well-known speaker, talking about SharePoint in the cloud, mix and deploy, what's right for you, that kind of thing. So that might be another resource, and I'll go ahead and put that in the chat window to all attendees if it hasn't already gone out. It looks like Asif sent it to everybody, so it should be out there already. So once again, thank you so much on behalf of all of us involved here for attending, and we look forward to seeing you at the next one.